Okay, Laurie, let me first say I have a lot of gratitude for what you said.
See, she's learning already. We're all learning.
So I've got a couple of questions for you, and hopefully if we have a couple of questions in the audience at the end, try to raise your hand. We'll see if we can see you. But so we're a group of type A personalities. Show of hands if you are not a type A personality. How about that?
A couple, that's good.
I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
But I think our DNA is drive to success. Our clients need us to be successful to help them get what they need accomplished. Are there some tips that you can give us specifically that we can leave here today that we could immediately put into place to help us try to achieve this elusive happiness as you described?
Particularly for type A. I mean, this is something I get a lot, right? The Yale students are nothing if not type A, right? That's how they get there. I think two things with that. One is just to realize that you can still be type A and go after the right stuff. The problem is often that we put our type A tendencies towards the wrong stuff. You know, we're going for salaries and promotions and all these things, right? When that might not be giving us what we want. And then it creates this vicious cycle where we do that more and more. And so one tip I have is just to move the type A stuff towards the stuff that matters. You know, what it would look like if you put your type A tendencies towards, you know, making sure you experience gratitude with your associates, right? Making sure that you had time to meditate in the morning, making sure that was a priority and so on. You can just kind of shift it a little, not towards the stuff our mind is lying to us about, but the stuff that really matters. Another is that type A folks really want to perform better. You know, you care a lot about doing a good job for your clients. And work that I didn't get into really suggests that we think we have to kill ourselves to do that, but the research suggests the causal arrow might be different, that folks who self-report being happy on these measures tend to do better at their jobs, they tend to get promotions quicker, they tend to live longer, they tend to succeed at other concentration tests and be a little bit more creative and so on. Like, we often think we have to succeed and perform and do this stuff and that will make us happy, but we seem to have the causal arrow backwards. Like, if we focus on the well-being stuff first, it actually has benefits you don't think. And just one quick Yale story about this. I teach this stuff to students. They're skeptical too. Their minds lie. They're like, really? I'm going to sleep more and I'm going to do better on my exams? But I see all these wonderful anecdotes where students, they'll buy in for one midterm season. They'll be like, all right, this midterm season, I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep. Like, this is not going to work. I'm never going to get anything done. And then they kind of sheepishly come back to me right afterwards. They're like, yeah, I get the best grades of my college career getting 8 hours sleep. Like, I think you were right. And so we don't forecast it's going to work, but the science really suggests it does.
Can you suggest, are there some triggers that maybe that we could, to make us actually activate and do, what you're suggesting? I mean, we all get busy in our daily lives, and perhaps there's just something that we need to stop and think, maybe a trigger that could help us apply these principles a little bit more in our daily life.
Yeah.
Any suggestions for that?
I mean, this is the great thing about talking to type A folks, right? Because you have these tools at your disposal. You have calendars that ping you. You have great routines. For the other type A stuff you do, just add this stuff in, right? Literally put in your calendar. With my college students, I have them literally put in their calendar time for time affluence. So when you get to that point in the day, you're taking an hour off, to meditate or to do whatever. Like, you have busy lives, but you can do that. And the research suggests if you do that, you will perform better after that. Again, not what we forecast, but what we think. The other is to make your habits do double duty. There's a lot of interesting research on what people call habit packing, which is like you pick a habit that you already have, and then you stick the other good habit on the end of it. One very practical one is all of you in the room probably brush your teeth. You all had to run down here, not very sleeping very much, but hopefully you brush your teeth. Do the gratitude practice when you brush your teeth. Just like as you're brushing your teeth, go through in your life the things that you're grateful for. Like, you're going to brush your teeth anyway. Like, that's time you're already spending. Kind of do the extra due diligence. Or meditate while you brush your teeth. Really pay attention to your breath and what the toothbrush feels like. Don't let your mind wander then. Again, you're doing that anyway, so you can kind of pack these habits together.
So, Laura, I have a confession that I did download an app. This is probably 6 months ago. That's called Breathe. It's a meditation app. I just keep forgetting to actually turn it on. Anyway, there are a lot of meditation apps out there that can help you, and it's only 5 minutes. It only takes a short period of time to achieve significant results.
And that I think is the really good news, right? Like you could imagine that each of these techniques require like hours and hours, like you have to be this like Zen Jedi master monk to get any of these benefits, but like that's just not what the science suggests. It's just 5 minutes. Like I know you're all incredibly busy, but all of you have 5 minutes somewhere in the middle of the day. You just have to find ways to prioritize that and force yourself to do it.
So when you're talking about gratitude, are you really talking about appreciation? And is that really what we're trying to achieve here, is a cognizant appreciation of others as well as ourselves?
Yeah, I think it's really just, thinking almost about the counterfactual of what your life would be like if you didn't have this good feature in your life. From your spouse to your kids, to your jobs, to the associate you really love working with, right? Like we have these wonderful things in our lives, but we often sleepwalk past them. We just don't notice it. And one of the techniques to do this better actually this isn't from modern science, this is actually from ancient wisdom. This is from the Stoics, who talked about this practice of what they call negative visualization. So the Stoics thought you should wake up every morning, and before you get out of bed in the morning, you should just think about all the horrible things you could happen. You could just think, my wife would leave me, I'll be exiled from my community, I will become a beggar, and all the like bad stuff. Why did they think that? Because when you think about the counterfactual, you like remember how much you really like that thing in the first place. A counterfactual I often use when I talk to groups like this is those of you who had kids, imagine that whatever the last thing you said to your kid was, it's the last time you're ever going to talk to them. My guess is if you simulate that, the next time you see your kid, you're going to hug them a little bit more closely, and just from that momentary negative visualization, right? We forget that like we really value these things in our lives, and it's only in some tragic moment where they're taken away from us that we realize it. But that quick little mental simulation can get us to feel that. It can be really powerful. And again, that statement that I made, it only took like 2 seconds for you to feel that moment where you value that thing even more.
So we talk a lot about mentoring as well with our associates, and I think sometimes I certainly can say in my career that you get frustrated, someone's not quite doing what you want them to do. And I think actually on the rare times, but sometimes when they actually leave, you go, oh no, I wish that wouldn't have happened. But sometimes in the moment, you get too focused a bit on the negative.
Yeah.
But the consequences once they're gone, so I can analogize it to that, is worse than if you had just kind of appreciated them more, shown a little more appreciation, maybe some more patience as they're learning along the way. And
there's so much work showing, we often think, how do we get our associates to stay, or how do we get them to be valued on the job? And again, our lying minds go to instinct like, we got to pay them more money. I got to give them a big bonus or something like that. But the research suggests that simple acts of gratitude can be much more powerful. There's wonderful work coming out of business schools about the act of superiors just taking time to thank their employees. Not just like, thank you, but like genuinely like, that thing you did, like, it really helped out the trial, or it really helped out that case. I really value what you did. That takes like 3 seconds. It's completely free for the firm, but the research shows like really large effects, like 3 to 4 times better performance. And this is in things like call centers where people have really thankless jobs. People will make 3 to 4 times more calls if they just get a genuine thank you from a superior. So we get in our heads that like, we need to completely shift the culture to make things better for the associates. It's actually really fast. It's really powerful, these effects. We just don't forecast they're as powerful as they could be.
And are they only powerful on millennials?
No,
is it just the millennials that need this constant appreciation?
Again, like we need it too. Imagine if you've had a complicated relationship at work, like walked up to you and delivered that gratitude letter I talked to you about, right? Where they really sought through and saw these things that you did that you didn't even know they realized, but like they recognized your hard work. That would feel amazing. You don't have to be a like snowflakey millennial to get the power of this stuff. This research is true in all kinds of different contexts, and it's true for us too. It's not just the folks who are under you. It's actually sometimes the folks who are across the hall who are at your level who could benefit from it just as much, if not more.
Maybe even your clients.
Maybe even your clients as well, yeah.
So do you have to try to or eat the whole elephant at one time? Can you do it in small bites to try to start achieving at least some change in your well-being in your life?
Yeah,
what do you suggest?
I'm glad you asked that in particular, because again, with my type A folks, the Yale students like, I will have time affluence, and I will meditate, and I will have social, they put it like, no, just like, the good news is that each of them can bump things up. People often ask, again, the type A folks, like, which one is the best? Like, which one should I start with first? And the answer is often, kind of two things, I guess, which can you fit in? Like, which realistically are you really gonna take action on? And the second is like, which are you most deficient in? You know, if you're the kind of person who's social all the time, you talk to people on the train anyway, like, you know, you're not gonna get much of a boost if you try to bump that up. But if you're, you know, really not present, you know, if you're really deficient in time affluence, you're really time famished, that might be the spot to take a little action. So the one that I put up there that you're like, oh yeah, I already do that, don't intervene on that one. The one that I put up there, you're like, oh yeah, that's the one I really need to work on. That's the one where you want to just try a little tweak. And again, the great news that comes from science, it didn't have to be this way, but scientifically, it just is the case that like, it doesn't take very long. It's like 5 or 10 minute kinds of things. We just have to stick it in.
I'll share with the audience a little, it wasn't really an experiment, it was just something we were doing last summer in our group. We were having morning team meetings because there was a little bit of a view that you know, there was a lot going on and people were too busy to just sit down and kind of share, you know, what was going on in their cases. And so we started one of the first team meetings and I said, I'll bring breakfast, and that was donuts. That was it. Well, as the next week's team meeting, someone else, one of the associates volunteered. I'll bring the breakfast. Well, then it moved into breakfast tacos, and then it really reached its pinnacle about 6 weeks into it when I think Jason Benford, if he's out there, he cooked homemade biscuits and gravy, brought them to the office, and you know, what was supposed to be a 15-minute team meeting turned into a 2-hour like major. Anyway, but it was great morale booster, and everyone just really started enjoying, like, okay, you know, it wasn't even just the talking about our cases. It was also, what was breakfast going to be? So it's just like the little things that sometimes can make a lot of difference. Right?
And I've heard I mean, this is a great one, right? This is like boosting our pro-social. We kind of get some meaning. You know, food just builds social connection. That's just kind of one of the features of it. But even other things, you know, I've heard cases of in other firms where folks start those kind of meetings with one thing that went well, one thing that you're grateful for, or some mechanism where at every meeting somebody has to come up with, you know, one reason they're thankful for the other person in the room. Some people even use like a cheesy, like some sort of thing that gets passed around. So every meeting is like, you know, if you're the person who had the gratitude thing, you have to hand it off. And again, it sounds so cheesy. Like you can get in this moment where you're like, oh my gosh, you know, my college student, like emo, like hippy dippy stuff, whatever. But like you guys saw that graph. Like it might seem hippie-ish, but like there was empirical evidence suggesting the power of this stuff, much more powerful than a raise or something like that. And it's totally free and it takes like 2 minutes.
So we undoubtedly are in a profession that's high stress.
Yes.
Even with my anecdote starting out. What advice would you give us? It's unavoidable, it just is part of what we do, to try to really address and be cognizant of the stress and the impact on our well-being.
Yeah, I think part of it is recognizing that it's so important, and that's why I love the commitment of this firm and the ABA to realize, like, you all are not going to perform well for your clients if you don't take this into account. I think that's a fact that we, in terms of the science, have just realized. You can try to white knuckle your way through it, but it's not going to give you the performance and the outcomes you need. Like, the reason that everybody's prioritizing this stuff is that it matters for performance. I mean, they care about folks' mental health, they care about people capital, but they also care about performance, and people know that performance is going to suffer if you don't do that. So I think that's the first realization, that it matters for your bottom line. I think the second realization is that these techniques can really help. You know, one of the ones I brought up at the end when I was talking about meditation that can be really powerful is this act of doing meditation where you're not just focusing on your breath, but you do what's called, again, it sounds hippy-dippy, but just bear with me, it's called loving kindness meditation. And your meditation is really thinking about wishing other people well. And so the technique is, you know, if you were to start, you just sit there for 5 minutes, pick somebody who's really easy to love, or if you have a pet, pick your pet and start by just wishing that pet well. You know, I wish you well, I hope you're healthy. And then just go through the different people of your life. Sounds super cheesy, but it turns out that practice 5 minutes a day can reduce burnout in first responders. It can reduce stress in people who deal with cancer patients. You know, I mean, you all deal with emergencies, but there are other industries that deal with, like, you know, super life and death emergencies. And it also can make people who, again, are therapists or first responders a little bit more patient. It's just kind of exercising our muscles to do this stuff. And again, it's 5 minutes a day. You have to find that 5 minutes and you have to do it. But my guess is that that particular loving kindness meditation in particular as a practice could really help folks in this industry, because it does two things. It, like, calms you down. And sometimes when the maximal frustrations and BS of clients are there, it can let you be a calm in the storm. It can let you like have just like one little speck more of perspective taking that can allow things to flow much more smoothly. So take a tip from like first responders, cancer treatment folks, and you can use these same techniques in your industry, and I bet you'll see really great results.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you so much.
I think we'd all get at least 5 minutes. So, any questions? Okay. Quick, we've got a couple minutes for questions.
You can try to see.
Okay, I do see. You're going to have to speak loud. I don't know if we've got a mic back there. So.
Yep. Scream out.
Yeah, scream out. We're not a shy crowd here.
Thank you very much for bringing this to the forefront. But here's what's not resonating: the external influences. I wrote down your 10 factors, and we can all control those. But here's my life. On Monday morning at 9:30, I got to go in front of an irrational judge.
Yep.
I then have to come back to the office where I'm going to be told I got to send out my bills and take care of this administrative thing. At 11 o'clock, I have to negotiate with a crazy lawyer on the other side, and then I'm going to call up a client in the afternoon and tell him I saved them millions of dollars expressing my gratitude, and they're going to find something wrong with it or complain about the bill. None of those seem to be addressed, and yet that's what creates the overwhelming sense.
Yep.
That was your first slide, right? Overwhelming.
Yep.
How do you deal with the external?
Yeah, great question. The fantastic news from the science is that if you deal with the internal, it helps with the external. And that's really good news, because if we had to fix the external, if we had to make every client not a jerk that found one thing that in your $1 million savings that was wrong, that would be really hard. If we had to make sure every case went through in the way we wanted, that would just not be happen. And this, again, both comes from the science, but it comes from the ancient wisdom. The sad thing is, like, the science often confirms what the ancient folks thought for a long time. And here's one where I think the ancient folks were right. It comes from ancient Buddhist traditions. Again, it sounds hippy-dippy, but the science bears this out. Buddha talked a lot about the external influences. This was his first principle was that there's always going to be suffering. He called it dukkha. Like you're always going to have the sucky clients and the sucky things and like the meetings that don't go your way and stuff like that. That's always going to exist. And his analogy was that we have some control, not over the suffering part, but over our reaction to it. And his parable that he talked about was this parable of the second arrow. So he said, imagine you're walking down the street and you get hit by an arrow. That sucks, right? But you wouldn't want to then take another arrow out of your quiver and like stab yourself with a second one. That would be worse, right? And he talks about dukkha. He says, that client who's like a real winner, like, that meeting, that associate that's a pain in the butt, that case that you put a ton of hard work and it wasn't your fault and went bad. That's the first arrow. Those external influences are always going to be there. Like fighting against them, like, I'd love to make the BS and the poop happens in life go away, but like, it's just going to be there. But the reaction that we have, the second arrow is on us, right? So if you have that bad client who says the mean thing, you win them $1 million, and like, well, you still in it, and you're like, ugh, and then you're angry, and then you walk out and you see your associate, and you like react angrily to the associate, and now the associate's kind of pissed off at you, and then you walk home to your family, and you're like, keep it all in, and then you yell at your spouse. Like that second part's on us. Right? We can actually control that. And that's what the Buddha pointed out. How do we control it? Not by changing the externals, by doing some of these practices. That gratitude practice I talked about, you build resilience from it. It sounds so silly, it shouldn't do it, but just scientifically it does. Those 5 things that you're grateful for, when the client says something bad to you, if you've been doing that over time, you've kind of built up your muscle where you're like, you know what, they said that dumb thing, there's bad stuff, but there's still blessings in the world. Same thing about these meditation practices I'm talking about. Like when you do this loving kindness meditation, again, it sounds crazy, but this is what the empirical results suggest. When your client says that BS thing to you, you're going to feel it, like you're going to have anger, but it subsides more quickly. You're like, you know what, I actually, I feel bad for them. These are people who are just deeply unhappy themselves. Like I'm not going to react to it. So the parable of the second arrow, I think, can be especially powerful in this industry, right? Like, you're never going to shut the first arrow off. You just have joined an industry that has a lot of first arrows, right? But every single one of you can control the second one. It takes work. That was my first principle. Like, you got to put the time in to get the work done, but that's kind of on you. And so what can you do as a culture to promote the second part? You might not be able to fix the first part. In fact, the Buddha said, principle of life, always going to be suffering. That's like the first principle. But like, the second arrow you can control. It takes work, but it can happen. Yeah.
Keep.
Other questions?
See a question over here.
We all spend a lot of time doing, and I think everybody does anymore is screens. To what, do you have anything to say about screens and their usage and their impact on happiness?
Yeah, no, fantastic question, and one we deal with a lot in the actual course. Again, I had to do like 26 lectures in a half hour, so some stuff was dropped out, but screens is a big one. So the way to frame, how are screens affecting us is to ask, are screens promoting the stuff that we know bumps up happiness, or are they reducing it?
We're talking screens, we're talking our devices.
Devices,
Okay.
yeah. People often ask about social media, but I liked your question about devices, because I actually think it's not social media that's the culprit. I think it's devices, right? Think about social connection. These devices are supposed to connect us socially, but even at this meeting, how often have you walked by somebody you might have talked to who's like this on their phone, right? Or, and one reason we don't talk to people on the train is that everybody's doing this, right? So supposed to bump up social connection, but doesn't really work. Sleep. For all of us, having that device sitting next to us, how does that affect your sleep? Like that an email can come through and so on. And it's not just folks who work at law firms. This is one of the reasons that our children don't sleep a lot. Of the percentage of 15-year-olds who have smartphones, how many sleep with them right beside them in their bed? 87%. I actually think one of the most evil things cell phone companies ever did was to put an alarm clock in the cell phone, because then you use that as an alarm clock, and then there's this tempting thing right on the side of it. But more, it's affecting things like our presence and so on. Researcher Liz Dunn, who I mentioned, is actually doing a lot of work on the subtle ways that screens affect our enjoyment and our social connection. And she finds these really harrowing statistics. One is that just the mere presence of your phone on a table, say, like when you're out doing something, can reduce the amount of smiling that you give to the people around you by 30%. 30%, right? And you kind of see why, because like you're kind of paying a little bit of attention to your phone, not as much to people around you. It can also significantly reduce the enjoyment of your dinner. Again, not if you're having dinner with your husband or something like that, and like you have your phone on the table, your dinner enjoyment is reduced, even if you never pick up the phone. And the way Liz describes this, which I really resonate with, is something in our mind knows what's on the other side of that phone, even if we never pick it up. We know our whole email's on the other side of that phone. For you all, some anxious, horrible thing could be there. You haven't seen it yet, but it could be there. Your mind knows that. But beyond that, it's just like distracting, right? Like every song you've ever listened to in your childhood is on the other end of that phone. Every art exhibit at every museum in the world is on the other end of that phone. Every cat video that exists on the internet is on the other end of that phone. And like my husband's a philosopher, we have great conversations, but is every conversation as good as literally every cat video in the history of the universe? Like maybe not. And so Liz describes this, Liz, to point out how bad this is, she's like, imagine to my dinner with my husband, I brought a big wheelbarrow, and in the wheelbarrow was literally a printout of every company email I've ever received from the last 10 years, every celebrity magazine that exists, a big pile of DVDs of not just cat videos, but every movie in the history of the universe, CDs of every song, right? Like, every novel that's ever existed. Like, that wheelbarrow would be full, and if it was next to me at the dinner table, it would be really tempting to look at that big pile of interesting stuff. That big pile of interesting stuff is in 6 billion pockets around the world, and we have no idea how it's affecting us. So it's no secret that these things are messing with presence, social connection, enjoyment, all this stuff. I think we're only beginning to understand the power of it. And I think, what do we do about that? Well, I think the issue is think about where these things belong and where they don't. The simple act of leaving your phone just not visible can show really powerful effects on this stuff. The simple act of having, some families have a basket where phones go into the basket at the end of the night, or at least during dinner, right? So that you have, an hour where nobody's going to bother you. Even the most horrible of emails that you guys get can probably wait an hour. And I bet your psyche would just be a little bit different if you could shove that phone somewhere for a brief respite. But yeah, huge effects that only new empirical research is beginning to look at, which is kind of scary given how ubiquitous these things are, right? Literally that wheelbarrow is in 6 billion pockets of people who normally would have been enjoying their meals, and now it's being affected.
I had a friend of mine one time say to me, we were having dinner, I put the phone on the table, and she said, you know what you just did? And I said, what? She said, you just told me if my conversation's not interesting, you have options. Yeah. So I put the phone away.
I love that. I love that. And I think I love that idea for phones, but for all these tips, right? You, in the stress of your life, you might not realize how much of an effect that you're having on your own community, of your associates and so on. They look up to you to ask, what are the norms, right? And if you set them in a way that's not super healthy, that ends up affecting you, right? If you don't give your associates a break, then they kind of don't give you a break. You know, sometimes it's urgent and they can't, but sometimes it isn't urgent and they don't know what to do. And so these cultures become kind of a vicious, unsaid cycle. But the good news is, like, the people who can break those norms are you all, who are the people at the top, right? Like, you have the control over this stuff in a way that I think is not often important. And that means the actions you take won't just be your actions. They will kind of have this spiraling effect. You know, it's kind of like you mentioned with these breakfasts. You know, you did that one time where you kind of provided, you know, some donuts, but then it has this snowball effect. Like, that's the great thing about these healthy habits is, like, you can see just a little bit of work on your part, and then it kind of spreads, which is great.
Homemade biscuits and gravy. Well,
It's the
Laurie,
Texan version for sure. Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you all. Awesome. Thanks so much.